Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC and Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Deb Markowitz, the State Director of TNC in Massachusetts, and also your host today. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to building a healthier world for everyone. We work locally and globally, which is one of the things I love about the Nature Conservancy, using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature is going to mean a better future for all of us, people and planet. We have a really exciting program for you today. We're going to be speaking with Celia Pigueron, Director of TNC's Mexico program. Celia's going to talk about some of TNC's key projects in Mexico. She's going to discuss how we're repairing coral reefs off the Caribbean coast, providing cleaner water in Mexico City, preserving the Maya forest, and improving the sustainable development of energy infrastructure in Mexico. Before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit about our guest. Celia Pigueron Wirz is the Executive Director for TNC in Mexico, and she's in charge of managing the Water, Oceans, and Sustainable Territories team. She's based in Mexico City, and she comes to TNC after having worked in the German Development Corporation, working with the National Commission for Protected Natural Areas, a position she held for more than 4 years. And in this project, Celia was the main advisor for Eco Valor MX project, where she directed a study for the valuation of ecosystems in protected natural areas. So I'm really excited to learn more about what's happening in Mexico, as I'm sure you are as well. And as you think of questions for Celia, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of her presentation, we'll try to get to them all. And I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. So again, thank you all for joining us out there. And thank you so much, Celia, for being with us today.
Thank you, Deb. And thank you so much to Deb and Liz and the team for organizing this exciting opportunity to connect between Mexico and the United States and exciting places all over the world. So as Deb was saying, my name is Celia. I'm based in Mexico City, and I've been with TNC for the last 3.5 years approximately. And as she mentioned, I've worked for several positions, including international cooperation agencies such as GIZ, and also other NGOs, but also within the Mexican government, within the Ministry of Environment and the Commission for Natural Protected Areas. So I'm just so privileged and happy to be part of the Nature Conservancy and to be able to share with you. The last couple of weeks, I've been picking up after 1.5 years of not going outside of our house, working from home, but now we're picking up on really exciting opportunities that I want to share with you. So if we can start the presentation. Hold on 1 second. There we go. We can all see it, right?
Yes, it looks great.
Wonderful. So the title of this presentation is Mexico, a powerhouse of nature for people and planet, because we truly believe that Mexico is a unique country that has so many opportunities, so many characteristics that are just a wonderful place that we can concentrate for the next couple of minutes. So just as a summary, Mexico provides abundantly to the world. We are the 5th most biodiverse country, meaning that we have between 10 and 12% of the species that are represented of the whole world. We have 1/3 of our territory covered by forest, which is very good news. The natural state of Mexico, the natural geography of Mexico, has the northern part of the country with more desert areas that used to be under the ocean. So we have more of the desert type, but we also have very long mountain chains along the two coasts, the Pacific and along the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, the southern part of Mexico is the more biodiverse, having the tropical and temperate forest concentrated in the lower part or the central to southern part of Mexico. So we have amazing opportunities also having a coastline of over almost 6,000 miles long, going across the Pacific, the Atlantic, and of course the wonderful Caribbean. And 11% of this territory is protected under a mechanisms of natural protected areas. So in summary, we have, you know, such a big, I see it as a big responsibility as a country to be able to continue providing not only for our own population, but also providing health and ecosystem services to the world. Next, please. I have it. Thank you. So I wanted to share this map with you just to identify why is Mexico within this group of biodiverse countries. And maybe some of you knew this, but if you didn't, I think it's interesting to know that the most biodiverse countries are located between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, because that is exactly where the sun is projecting the most perpendicular sun rays, and that provides a more stable and constant access to sunlight and temperature. So the temperature is constant, more constant than in the extremes of the planet. So I just thought that's kind of an interesting way of seeing the world, no? Why these countries between these two tropics are so important and so key in providing so many ecosystem services. So we also value and acknowledge that Mexico's indigenous communities are just these essential allies that we have been working with. TNC has been present in Mexico for 34 plus years. Starting in the Yucatan Peninsula was our first project. But these indigenous communities or original communities that have been there are cradle of ancient civilizations that are still very much alive. And any of you who've traveled to Mexico have surely learned and experienced the amazing traditional knowledge, the culture, the archaeological sites, the languages, no, more than 69 languages and 350 dialects. And this indigenous population is actually, you know, quite a big part of the percentage of Mexico, being 12.5 million people. And another very interesting fact is that 70% of the biodiversity of Mexico is located within indigenous owned lands. So that makes these communities the stewards of these ecosystem services, and it's just absolutely essential that we work with them, and that's what we've been doing for the last 34 years here in Mexico. So we want to ensure that we are using their traditional knowledge and their wisdom as well to protect and use sustainably the resources that we have. So this is a photo of one of our key partners in our projects in Yucatan. Her name is Maria Feliciana, and she is a woman who has led her household. She is the one who makes the decisions about the planting and how her land is being used. And so after many generations, she's been able to to be part of as the decision maker, no? But many times they're tough decisions that she needs to make because of the climate change scenarios and actual climate change that is occurring now, has caused less rain and more extended periods of not having rain on her land. So it's hard to be able to keep producing and providing for her family under these circumstances. So this is just one example of how the difficulties that sometimes we face or the people that own the land are facing. So some of these opportunities that we have in this part of the world where we have the Maya forest and the Mesoamerican reef is one of the iconic places where we work, which is basically, if you see the map of Mexico, it's the Yucatan Peninsula with the states of Quintana Roo, Campeche, and Yucatan. And the figures or the data that we have are just impressive. This is we have the second longest coral reef in the world. So after the Australian Great Barrier Reef, this is the second longest that extends from the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula all the way to Central America. And we also have the second largest tropical forest in the continent. So this is, in a way, this is the second most important lung of the region after the Amazon. And this is something that we just need to acknowledge and to make sure that we protect for future generations. We also have over 400,000 hectares of mangroves, which of course, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, mangroves were perhaps not valued and people saw them as, an ecosystem that was not very friendly. But now we know all the amazing services and benefits of the mangroves, being filters, water filters, being habitats to important commercial species. And also we value them because of their function in holding off hurricanes and reducing the impacts of hurricanes and storms along the coast. This area also has a complex underground freshwater system. And like I said, some of you that may have traveled there, and this picture behind me, if you can see it, has a underwater system that is basically a huge reservoir of water that is underneath. And the filtering is just directly into this underwater system. And it emerges, into these cenotes that are just, that are like one of the crown jewels of this area, both for tourism, but also as a water source for communities. So any of you who are interested in birds, that we have over 578 or almost 580 species of birds. And it's just one of the activities that we feel can be enhanced and can be used even more. Many communities are becoming experts in leading wildlife and observers of wildlife and birds that can explore this region. So we're very enthusiastic about using this resource even more. We also have over 125 mammals, and of course the jaguar and puma and the larger mammals that we have in Mexico are present in this region. So we have fish, we have coral species that also are important both for tourism, but also to maintain the biodiversity of this region. So like I said, we have over 1.8 million indigenous Maya people that maintain their traditions, their language, and are just the stewards of this territory. So this like I was saying, the Maya forest being a hub of ancestral knowledge, but also an opportunity to bring in technology and better tools to make better decisions into how they manage their land. So I don't know if you're familiar with the MILPA system, but the MILPA system is is the most ancient and widely used system of farming, which is basically combining several crops at the same time and including a rotation system so that the land can rest, the soil can regenerate, and it won't be overused or overexploited. So this system, we are making sure that we are protecting the system. We're actually proposing to the United Nations so that this MILPA system becomes recognizes a world kind of a classification called World Heritage Traditional System, so that it's protected and that it'll receive also attention from the world and be valued as a way of protecting the soil, biodiversity, but also is a means of becoming more resilient to climate change. So it has all these benefits that are just wonderful. So we estimate that about 17% of the population in Mexico depend directly on their land and the income that they obtain from their land. So sustainability of rural livelihoods is at the center of what we do. We want to make sure that we support landowners, farmers, so that they make the best decisions about how to use this land sustainably. However, we do have these success cases, like I was saying about Maria Feliciana, in which we've been able to support families. We've been able to work with them for, consistently, which is something that TNC does. We go into a territory or a geographic area, and we make sure that we're there for a period of time in which we can create capacities, create enabling conditions so that people can eventually, they won't be needing TNC anymore, but that we will leave the capacity so that the sustainable decisions can be made for the longer term. So we have been working with what we call innovation platforms, which is basically bringing together producers that are in the same geographic region, and we provide the tools and sometimes even the workspace or the actual physical space so that they can come together, learn from each other. Some of them will provide, like Maria Feliciana is on this program, so that she allows this plot of land, her plot of land, to be used as a pilot, as a model of different techniques or different tools. And so farmers from the region come in and see the actual difference, the actual improvement that she's been able to produce on her land. So we are investing in establishing these innovation centers, and each one is centered on a different production model. So one of them is centered for the Milpa Maya that I described before. Another one is centered on sustainable cattle ranching. Another one is centered on beekeeping and honey production, so that each one is tailored for what is produced in that region. And we've been very successful, and it's been it's a success story, and people coming together and learning, and we just know it's really the way we want to keep going. Like I said, I don't know, are we going to show can we show the video, Fletcher?
Celia, we can get that set up, but why don't, that might take a minute.
Okay. So we can do it at the end, perhaps?
Sure, that's perfect.
Okay. So let's continue. And now I want to switch to the Mesoamerican reef, which is, like I said, the second longest barrier reef in the world. And here we've been doing amazing work. We started some years ago with a study that helped us to calculate, what was the actual function or the role of the reef with regards to protection from storms and hurricanes. So through this study and through partnerships, we embarked on a very unique and innovative mechanism that Deb was mentioning at the beginning in the introduction. We designed the very first reef insurance in the world, which basically worked working with the state of Quintana Roo. We designed a insurance policy that would was paid by the Quintana Roo state government to actually insure the barrier reef, the coral reef in front of their, in front of their main tourist areas. And the conditions for this policy was that any hurricanes that were category 4 or higher, which is, for category 5 is the highest, if it impacted in this very specific region with this category 4 or 5, the insurance would be paid to the Quintana Roo government into a trust fund that we also helped to design. And that money, those funds, would go directly to restoring the coral reefs. And the idea was to have very quick response, post hurricane response, because as you know, coral reefs have a higher chance of surviving if they're restored 45 to 60 days after the storm. But while this happens, we're not just crossing our arms for the hurricane to occur, but also we've been supporting the National Fisheries Institute of the Ministry of Agriculture, but also the Ministry of Environment, because they have a laboratory here in the region in which they've done very unique work in a technique called coral reef fragmentation, which is basically fragmenting corals, and this creates a condition so that they grow almost 30% faster than they would under natural conditions. So there's this very small, but it's a very powerful laboratory in Puerto Morelos in Quintana Roo. So they fragment these coral reefs, and once they are a certain size, they are ready to be implanted or planted back into the reef. But in parallel, the question was who's going to do this restoration. So we've been training a volunteer group of divers called Guardians of the Reef, and these Guardians of the Reef are ready to go, and they are trained so that it's almost like an ambulance after a storm. They get into their boats, and they go with the coral reefs, the fragmented portions that have been in the laboratory, and they know the techniques to start the restoration of the reef very quickly. So anyway, last year we had a record-breaking hurricane season. You may have heard, how they name each hurricane, and once the names run out, you have to go into the Greek alphabet. So there were so many storms and hurricanes in the region of the Caribbean region, hitting, some of them never got to the shore, but some of them did. And one of those hurricanes was already named into the Greek alphabet. I think it was Delta hurricane. And basically, it reached the category 4, and it was pretty scary. We monitor and we make sure that our staff and everybody there is safe. So thankfully, there were no serious human casualties. But of course, there's always effects that need to be, that can't be avoided. However, there is evidence that having a coral reef in front of your coastline does reduce nearly 30 to 40%, even more sometimes, of the energy of the storm. So you are going to receive much less impact, no? If you have the coral reef in a good state. However, it is tough on the coral reef, so that's why we need the restoration to occur very quickly. So this is one of the testimonies of Alejandro Chan, who's a Reef Brigade member, and he shared with us that he wasn't aware that fragments of coral reef could be collected and made to regrow. He learned that he can do this, and he said that some people say that we're fighting a losing battle. However, he doesn't agree, and he thinks that we are making a difference by having this very holistic approach to reef restoration. So I wanted to give you also like flash news, the latest news of what we've been doing. We believe that this region of the world must be protected. It is so important, not only locally, but for the world, to fight climate change, to ensure the health of the planet, to ensure that we have water, that we have oxygen, that we have carbon sinks. See, this is also an important area for carbon sinks, and to capture GHG emissions that are emitted from all over the world. So we've been interacting with very high level areas or high level individuals. And one of them was a meeting that we had in early November with the Latin American Conservation Council, which is basically a council of businessmen from across the region of Latin America. And we presented to them basically what I just presented to you, stating that this is a region that we cannot lose, that we must make it more widely known, that we are working in this region, and that this private sector has a huge role to play. So this happened in early November, and the picture on the right is a meeting in which I participated only a week ago, in which 4 governors and 3 secretaries of state from the southern states of Mexico gathered. They were convened by the ambassador of the United States to Mexico, Ken Salazar, who, as you know, was the Interior Secretary under President Obama some years ago. And so we had TNC, the Nature Conservancy, was the only NGO invited to this meeting because of our work, because of our reputation that we have working in this region. So I basically presented more or less the same of what we presented to you today, and making the case that southern Mexico is in the president of Mexico is making sure that attention is being brought to this region, that the south of Mexico has been abandoned. That's the word that he used from past administrations, because most of the development of Mexico has been occurring in the central part and in the northern part of Mexico. So the president of Mexico wants to bring attention, investment to this region, which we think is wonderful, but we think that it needs to be done correctly. It needs to be done in a sustainable way. using all the Paris agreements and all these international agreements of how to do this in a circular economies, and learning from other experiences that we can do this better. So I wanted to highlight that this just happened, and that I think TNC is in a really, really good position right now, convening partners, convening political will, and that any investment that we can attract to our conservation work is going to go, a long way, because of the support and the energy that is being brought to this part of the country. So the Nature Conservancy works through very large scale and high impact frameworks. And one of these frameworks is called the Project Finance for Permanence, which is basically bringing together many partners on many different levels and scales, and making sure that we all work towards the same objectives in this region, so that we ensure the permanence and the sustainability of this region for the future. Excuse me. So rounding up this presentation, we believe that investing in Mexico, like I said, is going a long way, and it'll provide benefits not only for the local communities and the region, but also further for the planet. And we think that, there's few regions that are in such good state of conservation. Like I said, this is the second most important tropical forest in the region, and the second longest barrier reef of the world. So investing in Mexico through the Nature Conservancy means that it's not only for the Nature Conservancy, but it expands to other partners, and it creates a synergy that we feel is very powerful. No, so we have experience that we've learned from our work from the last 34 years. We can craft solutions for a sustainable future that put nature at the center. Excuse me 1 second. So we need to work side by side. No, we need the private sector, we need the government, we need other NGOs, but we need to do it in an orchestrated way, so that, instead of working individually in our own little worlds, we are inviting you, and we're inviting everybody that will listen to be part of this project, so that we create this synergy, this orchestration of talent, of treasure, of time, anything that can be helpful to make sure that we can provide win-win situations in which people and nature can thrive. And we truly believe that this is possible. So how can you help? Well, there are several ways. One of them is to help us, share this message. I think that it's not very well known that this region is so important and has the scale that can actually provide solutions, nature-based solutions for the world. So help us to share this great news that there's still so many opportunities for this unique region. You can also help us to scale the impact. So this is not only that something that is done within Mexico, but that we can bring in partners, we can bring in, like I said, talent, treasure, time, anything that will add and make this larger, and the scale can actually move the needle in the right directions. You can also help us to unite, like as partners. No, you can help us by becoming more directly part of this exciting opportunity. You can help us to unlock. You can help us unlock new resources that we can talk further and more in detail about what this means. Like I said, collective action, and help us to engage stakeholders. Right now, as I'm speaking, maybe you're thinking of ideas, of people that you know, of opportunities, and any type of conversation along those lines is just so incredibly helpful. So I'm going to stop here, and I think we can start a really interesting dialogue. Thank you so much.
So Celia, thank you so much. This was really a wonderful presentation. And I know the folks who have been listening, learned a lot. I had no idea that Mexico is the 5th most biodiverse place in the world. And it really was helpful to hear your explanation about why the tropics are so key in providing the world with ecosystem services, why this part of the world really matters. The other piece about the coral reef, I don't know how many people watching have visited that coral reef. It's extraordinary. And I did not realize how special it was in the world as well. The reef study is really important. And I hope our listeners understand how much that information really matters as we think about scaling. And let me just say, before I get into, we've got some questions, that one of the things that makes the Nature Conservancy so powerful is, we do a lot of projects, but we're never just doing a project for the project's sake. We're always learning about something so that we can figure out how to scale impact. So what you're doing in Mexico is really impressive and really follows that framework that helps us learn and share our learning. And so to that end, we've got some questions that build on this theme of impact. And so Mercedes Bezori, I'm hoping I pronounced your last name correctly, says, wow, the work in Mexico sounds very cutting edge and innovative. I was particularly impressed by the work restoring the reef. Are there any lessons or experiences you can export or escalate elsewhere in the world? I was thinking that myself. It seems so relevant. Like, is what we're learning being used like in Australia or Indonesia or these other places with reefs that I assume are also protecting the coastline?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, definitely. This was, like I said, the very first coral reef that was implemented in the world. So we learned some lessons, and we are actually in the 2nd or 3rd version of the policy insurance, so that we can, nail down better, and also the finances of this. How can it be the lowest price paid for this insurance while we get the most benefit in return, right? Because it's so hard to assign a value. How do you assign a value of how much this coral reef is worth? No? So I think that's a question for all of us, and I find it fascinating. That was my work in the GIZ, the cooperation agency. So I bring this to TNC as well. The environmental economics, I think, is just a fascinating topic. And so we actually went a step further to actually implement something that needs economic valuation of this ecosystem services. So yeah, we're expanding to other regions, to Belize, to Guatemala. Indonesia is also interested. So yes, for sure, the Nature Conservancy is expanding. But I want to emphasize that it's not only the reef insurance policy, it has to be a holistic approach, where you have the government, where you have the community engagement, where you have the science. So it can't be a one only tool. No, it has to be a part of a larger strategy. And like you said, we always work strategically so that we're not doing project by project approach, but we are thinking of the larger scale. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does. As you're explaining it, it just so much pops into my mind. One of the things, so I was the secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont. And one of the things we struggled with there was, we have all this pollution in our waters, and we're asking our farmers to spend money and do things differently to help protect the waterways from this pollution. And so we were always thinking, well, how do we create financial products so that they get paid for the ecosystem services of their farms, right? The farms get flooded and it protects the town. It ruins the farm, but it protects the town. So how do we, and this model I think is so innovative. It's about reefs. There's lots of reefs where it could be exported to as a concept, a conservation concept, but it goes well beyond that. We are, there's the valuing of ecosystem services and the payment for it, or using an insurance model for it, really could be a game changer for all of our work. So thank you for being on the cutting edge of it, because you lay down a great groundwork for the rest of us. So we've got a bunch of questions, and I want to make sure I can get to them. So Gail Rosenfeld says, thank you for your work in Mexico and reminding us of its environmental importance. And so I also was really interested to hear about the importance of Mexico to biodiversity. And I also thought, the way that the program has engaged, the way the Nature Conservancy has engaged with the indigenous community is also a real model. And it's something that across the Conservancy, we're really leaning into right now, is recognizing that indigenous knowledge is so important. I mean, we're all scientists, not all of us, but we come as a sciencey organization, and science is one way of knowing things. But there also are folks who've been on the land for generations, and that kind of experience and stewardship really matters. And I was really surprised to learn that 70% from you a minute ago, that 70% of biodiversity of Mexico exists within indigenous owned land. And so I'm just curious about if there have been challenges working with the indigenous population, or has that been just a relationship that's grown over time, so they're really embedded in some of these projects in ways that that could be models for the rest of the Conservancy?
Yes, I think one of the characteristics of the Nature Conservancy, like I said, is that we go into a site thinking that we're going to be there for a while, for a long time, right? So the commitment is long term, and that's why we choose regions that are big enough and at the scale that will make the needle move, right? So that we after 5, 10, 15 years, we'll be able to see real change and real improvement, right? So it's a commitment, it's a responsibility. And that's why I didn't show it, but we have a map of where we work in Mexico, but basically we're working in the Yucatan Peninsula, Chiapas and Oaxaca as like the southern portion of Mexico, and in the Gulf of California in the north, which you know, because we are, in the border with the US over there, but we don't spread a lot of projects all over the country. We want to make sure that we concentrate into these regions. So we think that's a appropriate approach. And yeah, I think your question about, the engagement with indigenous communities is building trust and building trust. I think that's key. And finding a rhythm in which we can innovate and provide, solutions that maybe we're bringing in from other parts of the world. But at the same time, we have to be careful and mindful that we're not pushing too hard, and that these solutions are actually part of their natural way of living and existing. We never bring in anything that will not make sense with the culture and the the culture and the way of being. So we are very respectful of that, and I, like I said, building trust. We work together, we cry together, we enjoy together, and so that's basically how we do it.
We got a follow-up question from Bernie Noonan. He asked, with 70% of biodiversity occurring on indigenous land, he's curious, what percent of Mexico's land is in indigenous hands? Do you know? You may not know the percentage.
No, it's a little, the percentage is a little higher in this part of the country, but many of you know that this is a historical issue, but it's an interesting topic. After the Mexican Revolution, basically, the large portion, if not 90% of the land was distributed to communities, to groups. So all over the country, we have ejidos. This is the official name of these community-owned lands that are, like I said, community-owned. So a group of families, a group of individuals got this land assigned by the government. So basically, I don't have the exact percentage, but pretty much all the country is owned by indigenous groups or communities, and that is a very powerful framework that I think is very different than in the U.S. because the land, the ownership of the land is just so different. So of course we have private property, but more in the cities. But in the rural areas, it's mostly the ejidos, and they have to come together, make decisions about their lands, and there's a huge opportunity there to work through the ejidos, to manage their land, to make decisions about their land, and that's what TNC does. We work through that. To those opportunities, and it's just the way it is, the law. No.
Yeah, that's really great. It's good to understand how different countries, differently countries do this, and are, because of the history of imperialism in the United States and this idea of manifest destiny. It's so much is in private ownership, and then the big public tracts of land out west, were wrested away from our indigenous population in a way that is problematic and remains problematic today. We have a whole bunch of questions, so I'm going to keep us going. Suzanne Clausen asks, what percentage of forest is being lost to new developments every year? She knows it's quite high in the state of Mexico due to corruption. Are there some strategies that can be used against this kind of corruption?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, one of the things that happens is that to measure deforestation or loss of forest cover is difficult. Mexico was because we've lost a little bit of the footing, but there's amazing information, satellite and spatial information, and the federal government is aspiring to have a system in which we can have a what's the word when you do it right at the moment, like real time
Yeah.
forest loss, and that's really incredible. And I think we're close, but the figures are, for the Yucatan Peninsula, we've estimated about 80,000 hectares per year being lost up until 2018 or 19. So we're updating that information, but it's a lot. So we need, I think the key is, and I think this is no surprise for anybody, but the key is to provide economic incentives, real ways of having a sustainable way of living while using the resources on your land. I think TNC started off with a very protection, conservation vision, which for the US worked great because the TNC actually bought the land and could control what happened. But here in Mexico, we are not able to do that. And also we're, it's owned by
People
communities.
have to live, right? Yeah.
So the approach had to go, we started off in Mexico with helping the government create protected areas like Siancán and Ria Lagartos and all these wonderful regions, Calakmul, that still exist. So we're very proud that TNC did this work, and we think it's incredibly important to maintain and to, keep these protected areas protected. Because I was seeing another question, and maybe I'm skipping in there a little bit.
Feel free.
But our work for the next 3 to 5 years, I think it was
Alfonso Alonso. Yeah.
Alonso.
I was going to get to that one next. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Well, then we can join those questions.
Why don't I read it? Because I want people to hear. He says, Celia, great presentation. Thank you. Can you please tell us about your plans for the next 3 to 5 years? Are you planning to focus your work in a particular region in Mexico? I'm very curious about the landscape in your background and where is it? So 2 questions. One is, what are we looking at? And then what's the future in the program?
Well, I'll start with that last one. This behind me is an ejido called Sijilnoja. Sijilnoja. I can type it in the chat later, but it's a Maya name, and it's something like heaven on earth or heaven near the earth or some beautiful translation like that. And look at that. The geography is just so incredibly amazing. How did this happen? The aquifer that is under there is the one that keeps the water level up there, no? So one of these regions, the governor of Quintana Roo 2 weeks ago, shared with us that I think it was a year ago, all of a sudden this whole system was without water. They just, from one day to the next. And why was that? Because something happened under the aquifer system that lowered the whole level of it. So it's like when you have, I don't know, a hole and the water underneath, comes up and down, and eventually it recovered. But it was incredibly scary to see these places. So I didn't mean to go down the not so good news, but the good news is that it's back up there. And this is Sijilnoja. They have an ecotourism project that they're working on really hard. So coming to Mexico, coming to Yucatan is also a way of supporting and making sure that you visit these community-owned ecotourism projects that we're also supporting. So the next question was about, what are our plans for the next 3 to 5 years? Well, basically, we are concentrating here in this region, the Maya Forest and the Mesoamerican Reef. We are convening a platform of partners, of resources. We have a pretty large grant given by the USA government to work with communities so that they are able to produce things like cacao, like coffee, like sustainable cattle ranching, some other products, corn, no? But that is all produced sustainably. And the key here is to actually help them get to market, get to the scale that they need to go, that they need to achieve, so that this can actually become a sustainable activity. So we need to mobilize $60 million in the next 5 years.
Wow.
We need to demonstrate, that we can mobilize this amount of money, which doesn't necessarily mean all of it coming into the Nature Conservancy, which would be great, but there's other ways of accounting that these investments come into this region, and that would be incredibly helpful to help us with that. So that's our plan. The other region we're working on is the Baja California Peninsula is also another part of our work, and we want to scale also the work we do on water, and water is just a cross-cutting topic that we need to upscale as well.
So we have time for just this one final question. An attendee asked, he said, great presentation. As a Mexican scientist and marine biologist, are there any ways in which we can help with some of these efforts apart from spreading the information, for example, volunteering and getting involved that way? And while you're at it, for the folks watching at home, are there ways they can get involved to help advance our efforts in Mexico? And I know you just mentioned come and visit and support these ecotourism sites, you know, helping to support the program financially. Are there other things in response to these two questions?
Yeah, I think we always benefit from expertise on any of these topics that I've mentioned. I think you know, learning and having more one-to-one conversations so we can be more specific. But yeah, we welcome volunteer work. We welcome experience that you can bring to us, energy, you know, and all of these ways are really, really helpful. Well, so what I would offer is to have, you know, more one-to-one conversations, more specific meetings. That would be wonderful. And we're starting to travel a little bit, you know. I'm going to Merida in early January. So, you know, we're starting our work very slowly, very carefully. We're very mindful to pick up our work in the field. So come along.
Well, we're really at our end now, and I just want to thank you so much, Celia, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. We really appreciate your support for the Nature Conservancy. It's your support that allows us to do all of this work. Hang on one sec. I've just lost my voice.
That happened to me too. I apologize.
No, I saw earlier. I just want to let everyone know we will be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days, and it'll have some links to the resources we talked about today, and that should help direct you if you really want to get involved and make a donation or get involved as a volunteer or come to visit or all of these things. And also, you should feel free to share the recording of the webinar that we're going to include there. You know, if you know people who you think might enjoy learning about our work in Mexico, please do send that webinar link along. You can follow us here at TNC at Massachusetts on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram. And that's a way to keep up with our work and to get updates on other virtual opportunities to connect with us like this one. And you can always see our upcoming webinars starting in our 2022 webinars and sign up for them at nature.org/MA webinars. And I just, again, Celia, I've learned so much today. And really, I'm inspired by your innovation, not just for Mexico, but for the whole Conservancy. We've got so much to learn from you. And so thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us. And thank you all for joining us and listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day.